Well, today and the date is the 20th of March. And I don't normally say the date, but I'm saying the date today because of what's going on globally, in case you're listening to this in the future, so that we can locate the context that I'm having this conversation. And I'm going to introduce in a moment somebody who I think is we're going to find this a really grounding conversation during the global pandemic that we have of COVID-19 and what that's bringing up for people and what that's showing up in the world. So I'm going to introduce to you in a moment somebody who is a dedicated advocate and spokesperson for refugees and asylum seekers across the UK. He's co-founder and director of not-for-profit organisation My Bright Kite. He arrived in the UK in 2007 after being forced to leave Afghanistan as a 12-year-old boy, achieving beyond all odds and arriving in a foster placement in Bolton, of all places. His experience of his journey shaped his future and inspired an insatiable determination and commitment to raise awareness and make a difference for other refugees. I could go on. He has just achieved so much, and I just want to leave it now that I'll introduce Gulwali Passarlay.
Thank you, Lisa. Good to be with you, and thanks for having me.
Listen, I had no choice. I read your book, and I didn't just read your book. I read your book this week, and the reason I was able to read your book this week, The Lightless Sky, was because of what's going on. And I'm one of those people who wanders around the country and sometimes the world doing what I do, and it's very difficult for me to find time to read all the books that I have. I love books. I have piles in every room, and this was on the top. And when everything happened and I realized, and all my work got cancelled and I was going to be kind of located at home, I picked up this book and I read it just 2 to 3 days. It was one of those things where I was walking around the kitchen doing what I was doing while with my book like this, reading my book. And before we get into a conversation, I just want to start off with the beginning prologue paragraph, if that's okay. Before I died, I contemplated how drowning would feel. It was clear to me now. This was how I would go, away from my mother's warmth, my father's strength, and my family's love. The white waves were going to devour me, swallow me whole in their terrifying jaws, and cast my young body aside to drift down into the cold, black depths. The journey was supposed to be the beginning of my life, not the end of it.
Actually, that makes me quite emotional, Lisa, because I don't normally read my words because it brings back memories. I mean, when I'm telling my story, it's not as difficult because I'm telling a story, but when I'm reading it, it had a different effect. So yeah, thank you for reading the book, and thank you for having this conversation with me. And you mentioned the date today. It's quite a special day for me. It's the new year in Afghanistan. So it's 1399, the Afghan New Year. So we just started the start of spring. So usually when I was as a child, I used to go with friends and family to mountains to have picnics. We used to cook food. We used to have a good time, but things have changed. I mean, I've not been home. I've not been back to Afghanistan for the last 13 years. And usually the New Year is a time of celebration. People, family gets together, they cook a lot of food and they have a lot of fun. But because of the global pandemic and this coronavirus thing, it has been all the celebration across Afghanistan in countries who celebrate. It's called Nowruz. Iran is the main. Iran, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, and a few other countries celebrates it. Have cancelled the celebration. So it's a special day, but also it's sad to see the difficulties and struggles that people are facing and are not able to celebrate their New Year.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, through your lens and your perception of the world, watching all of this happen must bring up very different feelings and thoughts for you. Because, I mean, if someone hasn't read your book, your journey as a 12-year-old across half of the world took a year, and it was like reading somebody touching death on a continuum and having a reprieve, and then touching death and then having a reprieve. And to be 12, to be a child, to not be recognized as a child. Really, in many spaces, some people did recognize you as a child, but I was also very struck about how you weren't recognized as a child when you arrived here.
That's the issue. One of the reasons I wrote The Lightless Sky was I wanted to give a refugee perspective. I wanted people to see and be better informed and educated. Why do people flee? What happens? What forced them to flee? And also what happens on the journey, and then how we treat them when they get to our countries. And I think particularly in Britain, I had a very negative experience, not because of the people. I think the people valued me, but it was the system who treated me as a suspect and as a criminal, which we will come to. But since this coronavirus for the last few months, and I've been thinking, this is terrible what's happening. It's very sad that the world kind of been shut down and countries are taking these unprecedented measures. But it makes me think, I have been stranded in Denmark in my in-laws. My wife lives here, so I travel back and forth. So I haven't been able to go back to the UK for the last few weeks. And I'm safe, and we are trying to do everything we can to not get the virus and protect ourselves. Even if we get the virus, in most probability, we will survive it. And the concern I've been having, the thought process I've been having in my head is that I hope we will come to sense in Britain, in the Western world, and particularly in Europe, that when refugees come to our countries, when refugees come here with so much hope and we shatter their hopes, I mean, they leave wars and persecutions, injustices and oppressions. You wouldn't believe, you can't imagine what I went through as a child growing up in a war zone. And it's the same case for a lot of, other Afghans, Syrians, Iraqis, South Sudanese, people who are fleeing from top war zone and conflict zone countries. They don't have a choice. At least we have a choice. We're staying home. And the thing is, what it has taught me, what I hope it will make people realize that there's more that we have to think about, more than the politics, more than this idea of national borders and nationalities and identity. The most important thing is we're human beings, and we ought to show solidarity. We ought to show sympathy. The coronavirus perhaps started in China, but the whole world is now kind of encompassing it, and we are all involved in it, and we're all in it together. And so in the same way that the world is kind of showing solidarity with people across, Italy and China and elsewhere in Spain, the problem I have is, why can't we do the same thing when it comes to refugees? There are about 70 million displaced people in the world, about 25 million refugees, and half of them are children. And right now, as we speak, there are children and women and men stranded between Greece and Turkey, who have been tear gassed, who have been shot at by the European border guards, and people stranded in the Mediterranean. Boats have been turned away. It's so sad what's happening in Italy, but the Italian government recently has been so brutal and so inhumane towards refugees. And I just think we need to come together and we need to understand, I wouldn't want to leave my home if it wasn't for an extraordinary circumstances. I've not seen my mom for 12, 13 years. It's not something that I choose. It's something that has been imposed upon me. It's something out of my control. And I hope people would understand. And I just want people to think. I want people to be concerned. I want people to have that sense of decency and humanity, and understand that, people leave their home not for any small reasons. People leave their homes and their families and their loved ones for extraordinary reasons. Look at us. The whole countries are shut down because of what's happening with the virus. And then wars and conflicts are far more deadlier than virus. The virus will go away a few weeks later. The Afghans been experiencing war for the last 40 years. My grandfather was a refugee. My father was a refugee. I'm a third generation refugee. And I hope that makes sense.
It really does. And I have been very much of the view since this happened that this is an opportunity, full stop. It's an opportunity. And the things that concern me in the world are around connection, division, and the environment. And we've seen the planes come down. So that's the environment bit that's waking up. We're seeing a government from a party that really has very little knowledge or connection or understanding of most people's lives, actually. And I don't say that with any judgment. I understand how humans are built and how we build our neuronal pathways and understandings of the world, and their understandings of the world are being shattered. We're watching people going, wow, maybe we should have made sure we had a better health infrastructure. Jeremy Hunt on television yesterday, or maybe we should have. So when you're talking, I'm thinking about the empathy muscle, and I'm thinking about how difficult it can be for people to understand things without experiencing them. Not everybody. Some people do understand things without experiencing them. Some people do have a very well-worked empathy muscle. But some people really don't. And if it's not happening to me, then it's not happening. And I can other that situation and pretend it doesn't matter to me. And what COVID-19 is going to do, I think, is open up people's eyes to other people's ways of living and understand that vulnerability is not something that happens to people over there. That vulnerability of humans actually is part of the human condition, and many humans are vulnerable. But what makes the difference is what the resources are around that person to enable them to be less vulnerable, to be more robust, to have that resilience. So I think we're in an opportunity. Are you feeling that opportunity?
That's well put. I mean, I've been seeing the images of, shop shelves being emptied and people showing very little compassion and regards for example, I've been seeing some videos of healthcare workers crying because they can't get enough food and supplies, and just makes you think, if we are in a peacetime and we are not at war in how people are behaving, some people, and then you realize, then we blame refugees and make them, that it's their problem, it's not our problem. So I definitely think it put things into perspectives. It makes us realize what really is important. So for example, I do something similar. What you're doing is amazing. I do public speaking. I do talk to schools about raising refugee awareness, trying to inform people, to get them to be more compassionate, to be kind, and so on, and to advocate and campaign for refugees' rights. And all of these things are kind of cancelled. And I'm thinking that's bad, but then I realize it's not the end of the world. Hopefully we'll get back to it. So I think it's a time for us to reflect. It's a time for us to ponder and to think about our loved ones, think about people who, again, refugees who are stranded in Calais, refugees who are stranded on the border of Bosnia and Croatia, the people stranded in Serbia and in Hungary and Macedonia and so on. Human beings are being treated, for example, the European Union and Turkey having a gridlock situation where the refugees are treated as a political tool. They're somehow a bargaining chip. And these are human beings. So I think it is time because we are so busy with our lives. We are so busy with materialistic things, money, which is important, obviously, but people are so busy, they don't have time to think. But I hope this gives us an opportunity to think and really see ourselves and our responsibility and our role in the world. Because again, as I said, we are in it together. For example, one of the best ways we stop the spread of this virus is if everyone act responsibly, if everyone act reasonably, not selfishly. If everyone thinks, okay, I might be young, I might be healthy, but if I get it, my family and loved ones will get it, and if I spread it to others, I just think the world is so interconnected. I mean, this whole idea of Brexit and the isolation that we are feeling and how we right now doing things differently compared to other countries. I mean, when the virus happened in China, it gave us so much time. We should have prepared ourselves, but we are not. Britain is not prepared. The European Union is actually now doing something. It wasn't prepared. We thought we're not going to get it. It was happening somewhere far. And the same thing, I hope people will reconsider and rethink when crisis happens in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Eritrea, in Somalia. It's going to affect us in some ways, but that's not the point. The point is these are human beings, and the least we should do is to help and support them in their pain and suffering, or at least not increase their pain. I mean, Britain and the Western countries are usually very good at militarily getting involved in conflicts, but then washing their hands of responsibility. I mean, look what's happening in Libya. And the European Union somehow have the guts to send refugees back to Libya, where they've been enslaved, where they've been killed in the civil war. So there's so much that makes me angry. I saw a video the other day of Australian soldiers in Afghanistan. This big documentary came out in the ICC, the International Criminal Court is investigating war crimes and crimes against humanity after 18 years, which is still, better than never. And so I saw a video, farmers being shot just for fun. I mean, this idea that the war has been involved in Afghanistan, soldiers have been acting without impunity, without accountability, and without any sense of morality. So I mean, I hope the Lighthouse can give that image of, if you're a refugee, there's so many factors. I wouldn't be a refugee if it wasn't for the Western invasion of Afghanistan. Yes, the Taliban was bad, but my family was safe. We were secure. Yes, they had a terrible governance and things were a lot backwards. There was no human rights and so on. I mean, I could go on and on, but I just think you're right. This is an opportunity for us to really think about our roles, our responsibility, our moral compass, our moral duty to one another, to ourselves, and to the world. Because, there are 7 billion or so people in this world. And we had to make this thing work. And it feels like we have failed it. I saw some images in Venice in Florence and other places in Italy, where the dolphins are reappearing in the rivers, and the birds are coming back, and the fish are coming back, and we have damaged this world beyond recognition. You know, you were saying about plane is being grounded. That's great, because sometimes we travel unnecessarily, and I just think, I hope we could be kind to ourselves from now on. We will be kinder to our neighbors and our friends and our relatives and our family and so on. And I think we just need to see this for what it is. I wasn't born in Europe. I wasn't born in Britain. That wasn't my fault. Where you're born is an accident of birth. That does not stop you from showing compassion. And again, showing kindness and compassion and care and being concerned for fellow human beings does not make you less of a human, and does not cost anything.
You talked in your book about the value. I mean, you didn't write it like this, but each time somebody showed you kindness, it was like imprinted upon your soul. There was an imprint upon your soul from each time someone showed you kindness, and it came across in each interaction that you shared in the book. And also what came across was your hope that you meet that person again so you can thank them for their kindness. And I just think that was such a beautiful thing to do, to make explicit. Yes, amidst all of that horror, the horror story are the social interaction opportunities that we have with one another to make a difference. And they weren't necessarily the big things.
That's exactly the point. I mean, even 12 years later, I still remember how the Italian police treated me so kindly. They brought me, when they got me, they didn't really arrested me either. They put me into the car and asked me if I was hungry. And I was on the motorway. I came down from a top of a lorry engine, which was very, very hot and dangerous. And they took me in and brought me food. I still remember they brought me oranges and croissants and a sandwich. They didn't have to. That was an act of kindness they showed me, and I still remember, and I will remember for the rest of my life. And I saw a lot of inhumanity and unkindness from people, but also a lot of humanity and kindness. I think I saw the cruelty of man to man, but also saw a lot of kindness. And I think, as you said, those are small acts of kindness that makes a big difference, because it's not a big thing. I mean, me walking on the street of Paris, people just acknowledging me and smiling at me, saying that I exist, I mattered. I was a human being. It helped. It restored my agency. And so there was occasion people will give me money, people will give me less, people will be just nice to me. But there were a lot of occasions where people will just like brush me aside as though I didn't exist. I was some sort of a dirt. They needed to get rid of me. And this is the situation what has happened to me is not history. It's happening to people. There are younger children than me who are on this journey right now. And we are doing very little in Britain. I mean, we were supposed to take 3,000 unaccompanied minors through the Dobbs Amendment. We didn't even take 300. We made a U-turn. And now in this European withdrawal agreement bill, we have taken out the clause about taking in more unaccompanied minors from Europe. I felt Britain has failed in its moral obligations and its legal duty towards refugees and our human rights record. I think, history will judge us. And I think history will judge us not very kindly. And I feel like I travel across Britain. I've been to over 200 towns and cities. People are incredibly generous. People are very, very kind. And, they want to host refugees. They want to help people in need. But it's just the government who lacks that political will to bring in these children. There are over 100,000 unaccompanied minors across Europe. At least about 10,000 or so needs home, needs place to be safe. I was in Greece after many years, after 11 years or so. I was speaking to the deputy mayor of Athens, and he was telling me that there are 4,000 unaccompanied minors in the Athens region alone, and half of them are homeless. Mm-hmm. And so I just feel like, with kindness, with small acts of generosity, we can contribute positively to what's happening. But at the same time, we have a capability and ability as a human beings to help in whatever ways we can. We might not be able to help all the 70 million displaced people or the 25 million refugees. I've just been trying to explain to people that, Britain in Europe is not in the top 10 countries for receiving refugees. 1 in 9 refugees are in Europe. 9 of them are in developing worlds. Lebanon have 1 in 5 people in Lebanon are Syrian refugees. Lebanon is the size of Cornwall. And, Jordan has taken a lot. Turkey has taken about 4 million. Pakistan and Iran, Kenya and Uganda. There are 4 countries in the world. They have taken a huge number of refugees, because usually a refugee goes to their neighboring countries. A lot of them are displaced inside. That's why about 45 million refugees are displaced inside their home countries. Afghanistan, Syria, South Sudan, and Iraq, and elsewhere in Europe where there's been conflicts, and Libya. So people need to understand it's not everyone who's coming to Europe. We had less than 1% of our population are refugees. And people say, oh, we are full. We can't take any more. I mean, we haven't taken anybody. Germany and Sweden, a lot of other countries has been doing far better than we have done. So I've been trying to bring this stuff to people's attention to say, look, I don't like facts and figures, but it matters. And I think sometimes there's so much misinformation and so much lies being told by politicians and right-wing media that there's so much fear amongst people. And I think I just want people to know that you don't need to fear me. I'm a human being. I deserve dignity, and all the refugees people, you don't have to see them as other, as you were saying. We are just, unfortunately, we were born in the wrong place at the wrong time, and here we are. And actually, it's the reason there's been conflicts in the world is because the West wants certain things. What the West wants, natural materials or natural stuff, like making iPhones and making luxurious goods, and then at the expense of people, then there's so much inequalities and injustices, and I mean, so much unfairness because of our wants, because of our desire to have things. I mean, I that's a different type of discussion, but that's our lifestyle contribute to injustices and unfairness and on an unprecedented level across the world. Because look, the children laborer, digging for gold, and they're working in mines and having terrible working conditions because we want stuff.
And I'm really hopeful that is one of the things that's going to change, because the pound is not a pound anymore, particularly at the moment. In terms of economics, the whole system is about to go, is in front of our eyes imploding, and that's going to be very interesting, unnerving, changing, challenging, fearful as we go through those processes. And it will have an impact upon that hoarding, that greed, that expectation, the idea that we can have what we want when we want it. All of that is going to shift for people on different levels. The fear stuff you talk about has been cultivated. A lot of effort has been put into stimulating fear from people who have perhaps not got experiences of a broad range of people around the world. But the thing that I did want to also raise was the complexity and, cost of currency of the trafficking network. It really comes across in your book. I mean, we think about that and we talk about that, those of us that talk about this stuff, but actually reading your book really takes you through that complex network that actually isn't that complex as long as you know where to go, which I think would shock a lot of people, that the amount of people in that network having a piece of the financial pie off the backs of people searching and seeking safety. I think people would be quite shocked at that.
That's a really good point. So the smuggling and trafficking exists. It's a multi-billion industry, and it's a criminal activity, but it exists because governments like ours does not have a legal and safe routes for people to travel. So refugees are put in this dangerous situation, not least because of their circumstances and because of what's happening in their home countries, but because governments in the Western world, or governments who are able to take in refugees, does not have policies in having civilized routes for people to come here safely and legally. And so that's one thing. And I think when I went through this journey about 12,000 kilometers or so of the back and forth, it should have been less than 7,000 miles or so, but because I was going back and forth and being treated so incredibly inhumanely by authorities, the smuggling network is very sophisticated, very well organized. I mean, I learned a great deal on the way. I mean, these people make money out of the desperation of refugees. And sadly, in most cases, those smugglers and traffickers does not see us as a human being. They see us as a commodity. And so I can guarantee you those smuggling will not exist if we had better ways of dealing with people. So for example, the people who are stranded in Calais, they wouldn't be making journeys, wouldn't be paying thousands of pounds to put their lives in risks because of smuggling, but because the government doesn't have a way and a system to welcome people through legal and safer routes and means.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's something, we think about that in terms of criminal exploitation, and you touched on it once, but I guess it wouldn't have come up so much because you were so young. But you did brush sides with the sexual exploitation as well. At one point, you saw it. You might not have made sense of it. You were very young, but you saw it and you started to understand that there was something else going on there as well that was part of this network and part of this financial gain for people.
Indeed, I mean the smuggling is such that they have it's a company, it's a business model. So there's a CEO, there's country directors, there's representatives, there are regional directors, and there are people on different levels doing their bits, and like facilitators and guides and drivers. And certainly, yeah, there's a lot of exploitation involved. And I think I was very lucky. I was a child that could have easily been exploited. I was very vulnerable, but I had friends and travel companions who supported me and helped me. So, there has been a lot of cases where children have been exploited, sexually and otherwise. And so, yes, there was occasions where I didn't, as you said, explicitly realize that was the case. But yes, certainly there were things happening which was not right, which was not moral, which were perhaps, in most cases illegal.
Yeah. And you've just touched on those friendships that you share about, but actually how precarious and how solid those friendships were. So they were solid enough to come back to, but they were precarious enough to leave behind when you had to. It was that battle between your own survival instinct and your need for these strong friendships, but actually that was such a tenuous thing. Did you really feel that? Because that's what came across in the book.
That's a very nice summary. So, I met people as soon as I was supposed to be with my brother in the beginning, which is in the story, but me and my brother was separated even before the journey began. And so when I met young Afghans and other refugees in Iran, we bonded, we became friends. They took me in as a little brother, as a friend. In this group there was three of us in the beginning. And then on the way, there were occasions where we got separated. And I remember, there were times where I was on my own. And so in a sense, we were all in it together in the same journey and experience, but there were occasions where you were on your own, you had to figure it out and you had to make sense of things. So you're right. And I had the book at the end, it tells where everyone is. I had about two different groups of people with me. So people from Iran to Istanbul, or to Greece. And then I had another group from like Istanbul, from Turkey, Greece border, to all the way to the Italian border in Greece. So there were occasions where I had to leave them, and there were occasions where I could rely on them. So you put it really well, because I could rely on them, but at the same time I knew that we could have been separated at any moment, any time. In so many ways, I think I owe my life to these wonderful young men. I still see at least three of them in the UK. Sahil, he managed to get his degree. He's a scientist. He now trained doctors and nurses to treat diabetes, how to treat diabetes. My other friend, Ahmad, it took him 10 years to get his status. He have wonderful two little boys after getting married here. Also, Sahil got married. Me and my wife actually traveled to the States to get him engaged in Connecticut. And then my wedding and my engagement here in Denmark, he literally managed everything. He was my big brother, which was great. So that friendship continues to this day. But unfortunately, most of the friends that I met on the journey I did not meet them again. Some of them got deported back from the UK or from elsewhere in Europe. Some of them are back in Europe. So some of them are in Greece and elsewhere. And so, yeah, that experience and struggles doesn't really end. There's always the struggle and experience. So yeah, there's only me, Sahil, Ahmad, and Mehran who are in the UK, and we're doing okay. We are safe, but most of our other friends didn't make it, or were deported a few years later. And so this friendship really matters. I mean, when people read my book, people write to me from across the world, they don't necessarily just get the message around refugee awareness and understanding our journeys and our experiences, but they get a message around hope, around friendship, around compassion, around humanity. And so there's like different messages in the book, which I'm really pleased that it exists. And it's published in 7 countries in 6 languages, which I never imagined or thought. We had recently had the updated version coming out, which is about 10,000 extra words around me getting married, finishing my politics degree at Manchester, and then doing my master's and visiting the States for the first time, and then things like that. So it's been well received, but I just want more people to read it. I want more people to be educated around the issue, and it's not just about the refugee experience, it's more than that, which I'm sure you could tell.
Absolutely. And I totally picked that up. I totally picked that up. I mean, thinking also, one of the things through my lens and through the work that I do and thinking about things in the way that I do, I was thinking about the trauma. And it's really, what's really different. So when I've been doing some work in different schools and they have had children who have been refugees, who have experienced trauma, what I'm really aware of is how little support there is for those children to recover from those experiences, and how that then is going to leak everywhere and also not help those children process and integrate some of those experiences, or begin to. And I was thinking about, as you laid out, just one trauma after another. And I wondered if you'd had any, I mean, it was clear that you were not received in that way when you arrived into this country. You were not received in that way at all. And that was really hard to read. But I wondered if over time you've been able to have some kind of trauma recovery, how you've processed those experiences, or you may well, and I would imagine is the case, on a continuum of working through those experiences. They're a part of you, aren't they? They're not something you're going to, therapy away, which might be the desired outcome from some, but it's about, I'm wondering how that integration and adaptation of those experiences into yourself, what kind of things you've done that have really supported that work.
I'm glad you asked. So I would say most asylum seekers, or if not all, and refugees, and particularly unaccompanied minors like myself, we experience so much trauma, not only on the journey, but also our back home, growing up in a war zone, and how that, losing family members and seeing things which are terrible. And so much inhumanity and hardship you face. So the traumas doesn't really go away, but you have to manage it. So for me, I think what has been important is I got some help when I was at school through my school nurse. I was kind of referred to after many years later to counseling services. It was somewhat helpful, but I think what has helped me, I have kept myself busy. So in school, not only was I studying, trying to get my GCSEs done, and I started in year 10, not speaking any English, and managed to get 10 GCSEs in 2 years. I work extremely hard and put a lot of efforts and dedication into it, but I also get involved in the school life as a school council member, as a prefect, I used to help out in the library. I always have filled my time with something. And even now, outside school, I used to be involved with the Youth Council, the British Youth Council, and the Children's Society, the UK Youth Parliament, and a lot of other committees and commissions where I was able to influence things, trying to make small change, but also be busy and be productive. And so this has been my way of dealing with the situation. I still have nightmares. I still struggle with mental health issues. I mean, a lot of the time in my culture, these are not things that are talked about. A lot of people say, oh, I'm not crazy, I'm fine, I have no mental health issues. And unfortunately, my brother Hazrat is going through a really difficult time with his mental health, and he's being challenged. I mean, he still doesn't have his status. His story is quite complicated. The Home Office has been very, very unkind to him and been quite brutal and inhumane, to say the least. So I would say, people say to me usually, they say, oh, of course, there's very little support from the NHS and from the schools or from the system, social services when it comes to trauma and mental health, which needs to be taken seriously. I think, physical health is usually taken seriously, but mental health is not. And so people say to me, oh, it's amazing how much resilient you have shown. You have so much resilient, and refugees are very resilient people. I have an issue with that. I mean, resilient is a very positive word. Right now, the pandemic we're experiencing, we are showing resilient because we had to kind of show resilient, and this is the situation that we face with. But when you're a refugee, you have no choice but to show resilient. You are put in situations and circumstances which is out of your control. It's because of events and certain things happens in your life, and then you go through this journey. It's not something that you choose to do. You have no choice in it. So I certainly have a problem when people say, oh, refugees are resilient. For example, if somebody have coronavirus and they come through it, that is resilient. If somebody wants to do well in their exams or something, that is really resilient. But when it comes to the refugee experience, I think it's quite, I wouldn't say it's insulting, but quite unhelpful to say to people, oh, you show an amazing resilient and refugees are resilient. And it's very, very problematic for me. I think what I have realized in the last 10 years also being in the UK is that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to need help. And that's the message we need to put across to people. But there has to be people who are willing to help and support you, who will not take advantage of your vulnerability. So right now, I mean, there's been all sorts of negative stories in the media or social media about people stealing older people's money, and then people like taking advantage of people's situations and circumstances. But there's a lot of other positive stories, which is amazing, that people going out and doing shoppings for older people, becoming friends and giving them a call and helping them with things. I saw stories of how some young students help older people to set up Skypes and set up all these video links to talk to their grandchildren, to their family. That's really, really wonderful. So I just feel like it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to need help, but it's also important that society and people, we need to be willing to help. If we are able to help, and what you're doing is really, really great and important, educating kids in schools about mental health and it's the traumas and the experiences that people go through, particularly refugees and unaccompanied minors, and they definitely need support. I mean, not only do they have to learn a new language, not only do they have to face the brutal home office and the way they've been dehumanized by the system, they still have these issues. And actually, being in the UK, as you said, in my experiences, I was safe, I was secure physically, but mentally, I thought there was no point to life. So the system made me physically safe, but mentally destroyed my well-being. And so not only there is no help available in terms of health, mental health and trauma, actually the system does everything it can to make you give up on life, to make you feel unwanted and unwelcomed. And so that's the sad part for me. Things have not improved, sadly. And recently with the Windrush generation review was published recently in the Home Office, there's a culture, institutional racism in the Home Office. And the Home Office thing, it can do whatever. It's above the law. And so things has to change, and we had to challenge these things, these inhumanities and actions of the government, which treats the hostile environment. We have a hostile environment where if you're a migrant, if you're a refugee, then you are treated very differently than if you're a citizen, and that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, and it's really interesting listening to you talking about resilience, saying refugees are resilient, and that has happened a lot with in previously. I think we're much better at it now, but describing vulnerable children, as very resilient, because they came through, etc. And I'm thinking about, with a systems model understanding of resilience, actually there was something that you had to draw upon, and you drew upon it continuously throughout the experience, and that was your mother's love.
Indeed. So I think the things that got me through was 4 things. So my mother's love, of not letting her down, more of correctly, to say it correctly. So not letting her down. I mean, I never listened to my mom, and I listened to her for once, and she sent me away, almost 8,000 miles, and not seen her for so long. I mean, she definitely saved our lives, but she also lost us. So my mother love in her, not letting her down, the determination to find my brother. Everywhere I went, I mean, the reason I ended up in England was because of my brother. Otherwise, I would be speaking Italian now and be living somewhere in Italy, because that was the only place where I was welcome, treated as a child and as a human being. And the other 2 things were really important to me, or keeping me going, and still does to this day, is faith and hope. We have a saying in Pashto that we live in this world with hope. And hope is really something. If you lose hope, then you have nothing. I mean, I did not lose hope on the journey. There were a lot of time I came close to it, but I didn't lose it. But when I was in the UK, I lost hope. And that's the thing that I hope people would understand when they read the book, that, we live in a country, in a system, in society where children will go through a year-long journey through hellish experiences and hardship and difficulty, unimaginable hardship and difficulties, and coming face to face with death so many occasions. They do not lose hope, but when they get to our country, where we should be, helping and supporting them, they lose hope. Something is wrong. Something is not okay. And so definitely faith and hope, that things was happening for a reason, and there was a hope at the end of the tunnel. And just like, again, there were situations where there was very little I could do other than being hopeful, other than being optimistic and being faithful, and just kind of relying on God and trying to get some extra guidance and help from the above. But at the same time, definitely, I think, my mother sending us away for reasons. I mean, if I had a choice, I would have stayed. I still feel guilty that I wasn't there to support my family. And these are things that people don't understand. People think we just choose to be here. We come here to take your benefits and your jobs. Actually, I've never taken benefits, and as though there are too many jobs. I mean, where is the jobs? But a lot of refugees who come here, they have a lot of good education. They have good experiences. I know so many refugees, friends of mine, and migrants who are businessmen, who are businesswomen, and who are doing great, and they're creating jobs and opportunities. They're very. To be honest, I don't know any refugees who are lazy, sitting at home doing nothing. They usually want to make the most of their lives. I mean, I have done more in 10 years. I say this with humbleness. I've done more in 10 years than people do in their entire life, because I take on every opportunity through school, through college, through university. I never imagined going to university. And there are only 3% refugees worldwide get a chance to go get higher education. I'm one of the very few refugees worldwide who actually go on and get a master's. All these things it was not something that I thought I will do. So I've done a lot of things on the way. I mean, I carried the Olympic torch, which was a proud moment for me. And, I won countless awards. And now this whole idea of writing the book and then getting it out there was amazing. It didn't happen overnight. It happened because of all the other activism and works I was doing. So things lead to another. And so I have not wasted my time. To be honest, I have become somewhat lazy. Like, I'm becoming more of the British wife life, and trying to complain about the weather and the traffic and everything else. But I used to be very, very productive and very determined, very dedicated, and focused on my, aims and aspirations. And whenever I meet young refugees, I don't talk to them about their experiences and journeys. I talk to them about their situation now, and how could they overcome the adversity, and how they could achieve. I want to know about their aspirations and ambitions. And refugees are very, very ambitious, because they had not had what we in the West or in Britain take for granted. So for us, education is the key, and every opportunity. I mean, I was at my school recently at Easter Academy 2 weeks ago, and I met students and I met people, and the teacher were coming up to me saying, "Oh, I have a refugee boy or girl in my class, and they are the most hardworking people." Because, we have seen what it means not to have these things. And we have seen to be growing up in a war zone, in a conflict area where, again, like with this whole global pandemic and this coronavirus situation, I hope it will make us think again what really matters and what we should be focusing on, and how we need to not waste time. Time is of the essence. Time is precious. We should spend as much time we can with our loved ones, with our family. We should be doing everything we can to show dignity and respect to those who are struggling, and all these things. I don't know. I'm just hopeful that this will make people think and reform and reconsider their position in society and their responsibility in the community.
Gulwali, I'm going to leave that there, because those are the key messages around hope, around aspiration, and around that opportunity to refocus. So thank you so much for joining me today. I will make sure that your book, The Lightless Sky, is in the comments for people. Highly recommend everyone reads it. Have yourself a beautiful day.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Wish you well, and looking forward to meeting you in person one day soon.